Welcome to Trade Finance Talks, a podcast from Trade Finance Global. During this series, we'll be hearing from global experts, as well as learning about the latest trends, technology and insights in the world of international trade and receivables finance. Episode 4.
My name's Dipesh Patel, editor at Trade Finance Global. Brexit continues to cause uncertainty and volatility for small businesses and UK exporters. Britain was supposed to be departing the EU last week, but instead, we saw Prime Minister Theresa May announcing her own departure, surrendering to calls for her to say that she would step down if Britain formally left the EU. Britain's businesses are exhausted from Brexit discussions, which is hindering its reputation as an economic powerhouse and pillar of economic stability. The Prime Minister has until the 12th of April to seek a longer extension to the Article 50 process if the UK is to avoid leaving without a deal. This week, we're going to be joined by Lesley Batchelor, OBE, the Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade, with her views on how UK businesses can improve their export performance despite the current geopolitical situation. Lesley Batchelor is a champion of UK exporters, with a powerful track record in enhancing the export performance of hundreds of businesses. From a blue-chip background, she now works as Director General for the Institute of Export and International Trade, an education foundation providing qualifications and support for business for over 80 years. Lesley is active on the APPG advisory panels on trade and investment and manufacturing. She has given evidence to the House of Lords Select Committees on government support for SMEs. Lesley is often sought out for comment on Brexit and international trade issues, writing thought leadership pieces for many journals. The IOE is a body representing and supporting the interests of everyone involved in importing, exporting and international trade. With a world-renowned suite of qualifications and training, the Institute is a leading authority with a mission to enhance export performance of the UK. This is principally achieved by the provision of education, training, and practical business support services. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Lesley Batchelor from the Institute. Hi Lesley, welcome to Trade Finance Talks.
Hi there. Thanks very much for having me.
So in 30 seconds, please tell us your story.
My story is I fell in love with international trade at the age of 18, working for Ciba-Geigy, and I haven't stopped loving it. I wake up every day and learn something new, and hopefully help other people to learn something new too.
Great. So let's go straight into the geopolitical turmoil and macroeconomic uncertainty around Brexit and last week's event. What is the real impact that you're seeing in relation to the Institute's SME members?
Well, obviously there's a lot of confusion out there, and what we're finding is business are making decisions about moving to different markets. They are trying to keep a foot in each country, so one in the UK and one in Europe somewhere. There's a lot of confusion about warehousing space, which is being gobbled up very, very quickly, and they're not sure what paperwork they're going to be filling in. So there's a lot of clarity needed. There's a lot of searching for information, but unfortunately, there's not a lot out there.
Completely agree, and we're seeing exactly the same thing at Trade Finance Global. We've also seen much stress from freight forwarders and warehouse owners who are stockpiling goods. So just going on to that specific example, what is your advice to business owners in terms of navigating some of the key risks and uncertainties around Brexit right now?
Well, I suppose the first issue has to be to talk to your customers and to your suppliers. Let them know that you want to continue doing business with them. Let them know exactly where you stand and keep them informed about anything you know. Of course, we can't be sure about the percentages that will be included in the World Trade Organization tariffs, but we can be sure that actually there are going to be different types of paperwork needed, and there's always this risk that the import duties will be imposed. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that, but I believe talking to businesses makes a lot of difference.
Are you seeing examples of any businesses looking to increase the number of their export partners to outside of the EU, so China or the US, for example?
Well, they are, but there's a lot of resistance. There's a lot of reticence in doing too much in the way of investing. And of course, if you're going to go to a new market, you really do have to invest in that market. I genuinely think that they are worried building up their new export markets, although we all know they should be doing that. A lot of people state the fact that they don't have the knowledge, and that worries us because we try very hard to make sure people can understand what's going on, in the short term, sort of with one-day training courses, but in the longer term with our qualifications and our academic courses in the fullness of perhaps things like World Customs Compliance and Regulations, which has proved to be a very, very popular qualification in the last few months.
Of course, specifically with all of the uncertainty and the chance of moving towards WTO terms in the case of a no-deal Brexit, that training is essential. What specifically within that training do you think businesses are learning the most about right now?
Well, I think there are two things here. One is that WTO, we all trade on WTO terms anyway. Even the EU is covered by WTO. What we're talking about is actually the paperwork and the changes that will be made if the rules of origin change and if we need to look at using most favoured nation status. Obviously, if we can get some schedules in place, if we can get some rolling over of these agreements, that's great. On a bigger picture, we know that we are helping businesses to learn. We use 4 pillars. We have one pillar of learning, which is all about how things like WTO work, how the legal structures work, intellectual property and contract law, so very much on that legal aspect side of things. We then have a second pillar that's all about market research and marketing to a different culture. Our third pillar is all about finance and finance of international trade in terms of getting the pricing right and foreign exchange. And the fourth pillar is all about compliance and regulations and how the logistics work. So we know that when people have studied with us, they have a good overview of the context in which they're trading, and just knowing and understanding where every little bit fits in makes you understand when to go to a trade finance organisation, when to go to a logistics, when to do the market research, and also when to stop researching and just get out there and get into the new market.
Thank you. And I think there are very 4 important pillars, and at TFG, we mainly look at the financing side, but actually increasingly being aware of those other 3 pillars is so important for businesses. What out of those 4 pillars do you think right now is the most complex and the most challenging for SMEs?
Well, I think we have to say, obviously, the first pillar where we talk about world trade and how world trade operates to get that context, but then, of course, the compliance and the regulation that you have to adhere to. Basically, there are 2 main elements that people are learning now. One, of course, is the WTO and how the contracts and international law works and impacts on your business, but more important, the detail of the compliance and the regulation that you have to adhere to are becoming more and more popular. And indeed, we seem to have collectively lost our memory on how this works as a nation. So it's good to get people going back to it.
Thank you very much. Just moving on to some of the costs around various elements of exporting, particularly around 2 things. Number one, obviously, doing trade around the EU in the case of a no deal might incur significant customs related and tariff related costs to the business. Furthermore, the volatility right now is weakening the pound sterling. What do you think are the biggest effects of this for small businesses, and what are they doing to navigate and hedge these risks?
Well, I suppose the biggest risk to businesses is paperwork, because if we get the paperwork wrong, goods don't travel necessarily as smoothly as they should do, and that damages their relationship with their customers or indeed their suppliers. I think paperwork is key. We're talking about, I think HMRC called it at £32.50 per cargo, but then that doesn't include certificates of origin, and it doesn't include any special technical certificates you might need for your product, depending on what product area you're working in. I think the other concern is the fact that people don't seem to understand that some sectors are completely worry-free as far as WTO terms are concerned. There are zero-rated pharmaceuticals, for example. These are zero-rated, and invariably it doesn't impact a huge amount when you send it to another country. Obviously, you have the paperwork to concern yourself with. However, if you've got a product like, say, for instance, ceramics, and their tariff code averages between sort of 5 and perhaps 25%. If you're talking about, for instance, champagne is 20% tariff on it. And this is the money that businesses have to pay to import your goods. So as exporters, it means that your customer in your final destination country of the cargo is potentially going to have to pay additional fees. And that could range between, as I say, 5 and 20. If you're looking at agricultural products, this could be 30 to perhaps even 45%. These are huge variations there, and it's going to impact on your customer in that country. Likewise, bringing in goods from abroad, anywhere abroad, attracts import duties, and these are all triggered by your customs codes and also which chapter you're working under, and it triggers whether or not it needs to be inspected, it needs certificates, or in any way there's an issue with the product. So the goods coming into our country as imports are subjected to tariffs. These tariffs impact on the price that they are charged in this country. Obviously, some of the money goes into the coffers of the Treasury, but effectively those goods, if they come in on zero rates, as I think has been suggested, it would begin to impact on our manufacturers here as far as their pricing is concerned. So we've been talking to Dover, for example, and they look after 20% of our goods that are imported and exported, and they're talking with their local authorities and with all the different elements included of £250 million a day in additional costs. We talked to Honda, for example, say that they're going to have 60,000 extra pieces of paper to deal with every year. These are going to have costs. These are going to have people employed to look after them. They're going to have small-term difficulties as far as certification is concerned, but big-term difficulties in getting that to flow smoothly. These are all extra costs, and honestly, it's a big, big project to try and work out where the costs are coming from.
Very interesting. And I guess it's we hear a bit of a media storm coming out of Dover, and we hear about queues, we hear about pharmaceutical companies who are stockpiling. And I guess sometimes the media and the storm that we see doesn't necessarily help, and actually knowing the details, knowing your SIC or HS codes and knowing how they might be impacted under different trading terms as a result of a potential no-deal Brexit is so, or even as we exit the EU, we need to understand those terms very clearly and what that means for the cost of doing business overseas, right?
Absolutely. And I think more importantly, knowing your product code, getting these IORI numbers that you need from HMRC, trying to set up some alerts so you hear everything that HMRC are talking about. They have got short-term issues that they've put in place. The transitory simplified procedures for roll-on, roll-off. They've got a lot of work that they've put into this. I don't think they communicated it as broadly as they could have done, but do try and keep in touch with HMRC. They're doing a lot. We're doing a lot to try and give people the training they need for the paperwork. There's a lot of help out there, but a lot of people are just sitting there, unfortunately, worrying, and we don't want them to worry, I promise.
Completely agree with you. So let's move on to education. And I know you've alluded to some points here before. We constantly report the education gap within the shipping and exporting space. What exactly is the Institute doing to address this?
Well, we have for a great many years run our basic qualifications in international trade, and they have always worked from level 3 all the way through to a level 5. So level 3 is an A level, and a level 5 is the second year of a degree. We have relationships with universities of Plymouth and with Warwick, and all of these qualifications go towards a master's or eventually a master's or a bachelor's degree. We're working with the apprenticeship schemes, we're working with freight forwarders. We have got a lot of information out there, tried very hard to get an apprenticeship in international trade, but couldn't get the volume. Having said that, we're still producing these with the different universities. Huge take up on this, and we're very excited. But we need more people to understand how trade works. We need more experts, because actually just aren't the experts out there. So the more people studying, the better. It doesn't take forever. It's not an arm and a leg to buy the study materials. We do it all online. You get an expert that sits with you and tutors you through it, as much help as you want or as little help as you want. But basically, it's a digital offering with tutor support.
And am I right in saying that for businesses to send some of their employees to do some of these qualifications, there are some form of grants, funding and various apprenticeships available?
There's against the apprenticeships, there's the levy that you can get hold of, and there are some of the large freight forwarders in particular who are helping out by allowing their levy to be shared. There is a grant system at the moment, but I think it's going to come to an end very soon for short course training. And we've got a couple of processes we're doing with called customs pathways, where we can train somebody to a level 3 in the actual customs practitioner award. So that's really new qualification, started just before Christmas. It also leads us up to our full diploma in international trade, which is the World Customs of Compliance and Regulations. And that is a level 5 and an excellent qualification for anyone wanting to understand compliance. It's not easy, and I really wish that we could actually get the message across in easy when you know how, but unfortunately it's like everything, you have to learn first.
Completely agree, and I guess education is absolutely key here, and you must be prepared for many of the different eventualities, and knowledge is very good, hugely important here. So politics aside, and let's spin this around a little bit. What are your thoughts with regards to Brexit in terms of how it will play out for international trade?
Well, I think as far as international trade is concerned, I think it will continue. I think we've suffered these sort of bumps along the way. I'm not calling this a bump exactly, but I am conscious that we are part of world trade, and obviously globalisation has been something that the government and our country has benefited from greatly. I think there's a new way of doing things, and I think we have to accept that we are part of a big picture here. The Institute itself is actually world leader in the training and qualification side of things. We work with Saudi Arabia, we're working with the WTO, the International Trade Centres, and we are very much in a league of our own, only being touched as far as our qualifications are concerned by the Canadians. So I think we need as a country to believe that we are brilliant, but also for us to actually learn how to join in with how trade works, because trade will continue. I'm just hoping that we're going to continue to be profitable, and the only way you can be profitable if you understand how the whole process works and actually get to grips with it all, really.
That sounds good. And I guess there are some positives that could well stem out of Brexit, providing decision makers, experts in exporting, etc., continue to learn and understand the complex trade system we live in every day, because at the end of the day, everyone needs oil, everyone needs commodities. The trade flows might change, but trade needs to happen for the day-to-day functioning of our economy and our world.
Yeah, absolutely. I never understood the argument which said we had to get out of the EU so we could trade, because actually it was a brilliant trading organisation. and we as a nation didn't really take advantage of it to its fullest extent. I always thought of it as sort of like a Costco membership, and I don't know whether you know what I mean, where there's a big buying company and they do special deals and you can go along with your membership and get the discounts that they've arranged for you. And I always used to think of the EU as a great big Costco card.
Yeah, completely agree there. So just in terms of the next few years for the Institute of Export, what does that look like and what are your priorities in the medium to longer term future?
Well, our priorities are very much, we're a charity, which seems a bit odd, and we run very much with our members and all exporters at heart. If people need our help, we're here for them. We continue to bring in new qualifications. We're actually focusing in on the customs procedures at the moment, because obviously this is very needed. Having said that, we're also working with the export control profession and launching a specific professional denomination specifically for them in May. So a lot happening for us, lots of different opportunities coming from all over the world, as well as obviously within the UK too.
Thank you very much, Lesley. So just a final question here, and something perhaps for some of our SME listeners. If you could give 3 pieces of advice to a UK exporter right now, what would it be?
Oh, gracious. I think the first piece of advice is to take advice, to look for it. There's no point in worrying about Googling things. It's a great way of finding out. Don't think it's not valid. It's a great way of getting into the next stage of things. I think research and find out how WTO works. Make sure that we don't make the same mistakes we made with the EU, where we didn't really understand how it works. Engage with that, but most importantly, make sure your customers and your suppliers know what you're doing and ask them for help and advice. Ask them how they feel about what's going on too, because this is a two-way street. And I think the more you talk, the better it works. Hopefully we're not going to lose customers over these things, but at least understand how that could work.
Great pieces of advice. Take advice and don't be afraid to Google things. Research and find out how the WTO works and various agreements there, and communicate to your suppliers, communicate to your customers, and let them know what you're doing. Really good advice and tips. So please do visit Open to Export and the Institute of Export and International Trade. Lesley, thank you very much for coming on our show today. Really, really good to hearing from you, and look forward to speaking soon and continuing to see all of the advances of the Institute over the coming months.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
If you're a business exporting overseas, make sure you visit opentoexport.com or export.org.uk to find out how the Institute of Export can help your business access the appropriate education and guidance around customs procedures, requirements, and export planning.
Thanks for listening to Trade Finance Talks. Be sure to subscribe to our podcasts at tradefinanceglobal.com.